Dawn breaks over the Anatolian plateau on the 1st of July, 1097. Morning mist clings to the grass along the Timbres River, where 10,000 Christian soldiers sleep, half a world from home. The first arrow strikes a tent pole with a sharp crack, then another, then 1,000 more. Within seconds, the sky darkens as 25,000 Turkish mounted archers surround the camp. War cries shatter the silence, a sound unlike anything the Europeans have ever heard. Men scramble from their tents, horses scream, an unarmored pilgrim takes an arrow through the throat and falls without a sound. But then, something strange happens. An arrow strikes a Norman knight square in the chest. He staggers backward from the impact but remains standing. The arrow has bent against his chainmail. Another knight takes 3 shafts to the shoulder, the torso, the thigh. All bounce off or fail to penetrate. The Turks fire faster, aiming for the same targets. The arrows cannot pierce the iron. On this morning, in this meadow, faith and metal collide with consequences no one expected. 10 months earlier, on a scorched battlefield near Sivto, Sultan Kilij Arslan surveys the aftermath of his crushing victory. Bodies litter the ground for half a mile in every direction. 17,000 Christians lie dead, most of them peasants who never stood a chance against his mounted archers. The young sultan, only 17 himself, but already hardened by years of captivity and warfare, sits atop his Arabian stallion and watches his warriors loot the corpses. They laugh as they discover crude farming implements carried as weapons, tattered clothes worn as armor, wooden crosses clutched in dead hands. The People's Crusade, they called it. A rabble of old men, women clutching children, believers without discipline or skill. His horse archers had cut them down like wheat before a scythe. An advisor named Hassan approaches on horseback, his face weathered by decades of warfare. He bows his head respectfully. "My Sultan," our scouts report another Christian army approaching from Constantinople, this one led by Frankish nobles with trained soldiers. Kilij Arslan waves a dismissive hand. More peasants with crosses. The Byzantines send us their refuse and call it an army. We will deal with them the same way when they arrive. Hassan hesitates, choosing his words carefully. "My Sultan, the Byzantines say these warriors are different. They speak of Norman knights, men who fight on horseback in heavy armor. The Emperor Alexios fears them." The young Sultan laughs, a sharp sound without humor. "The Greeks fear their own shadows. These Franks bleed and die like any other men. When they come, we will show them what happens to invaders who dare enter our lands." He gestures to the carnage around them. "This is the fate of all who challenge the Seljuk Sultanate. Let them come." Hassan says nothing more, but his eyes linger on the dead. These were not warriors. They were innocents led to slaughter by prophets and dreamers. The real test lies ahead, and he wonders if his young sultan understands the difference. Far to the west, across the Mediterranean Sea, autumn rain lashes the stone walls of Bari. In a dim armory that smells of oil and metal, Bohemond of Taranto stands watching a blacksmith repair his chainmail. At 42, he is a giant among men, standing a full head taller than most, his shoulders broad as an ox yoke. Scars from decades of warfare mark his arms and face. He runs his fingers over the interlocking iron rings of his hauberk, each one individually riveted, the work of months by skilled craftsmen. The metal is cool to the touch, heavy, brutally uncomfortable to wear for more than a few hours, but it works. He has tested it against arrows, against blades, against the weapons that kill unarmored men in seconds. His nephew Tancred enters, young and eager, mail clinking as he walks. "Uncle, the men are ready. 500 knights, 3,000 infantry. We sail for Constantinople in the morning." His voice carries the excitement of a man who has never seen real war, who imagines glory without understanding its cost. Bohemond does not turn from the armor. "The Byzantines will betray us, Tancred. They always do. I fought them for 5 years. I know how they think. They will use us to reclaim their lost territories, then discard us when we are no longer useful." Tancred frowns. Then why go? Why sail to the aid of those who will betray us? Bohemond finally looks at his nephew, and his eyes are cold, calculating. "Because Pope Urban promised us land, salvation, and glory. Because every noble house in Europe is taking the cross, and those who do not will be forgotten. Because I have fought my entire life and have nothing permanent to show for it. No duchy, no kingdom, just a minor port city that my half-brother disputes. This crusade is my last chance to build something that will outlast me. He lifts the repaired hauberk, testing its weight. And because, nephew, the Turks are not the Greeks. They fight from horseback, with bows that can kill a horse at 200 paces. Their cavalry never stops moving. They shoot and retreat until you are too exhausted to chase them. But they have never faced Norman knights in full armor. They have never tried to kill men who cannot be killed by arrows alone. We have an advantage they do not expect. He smiles grimly. That advantage may be the only thing that keeps us alive. The next morning, Bohemond's ships leave Bari, sails filling with wind as they cross the Adriatic. It takes months to reach Constantinople, marching overland through the Balkans, controlling his Norman warriors who want to plunder every Byzantine village they pass. By April of 1097, the various Crusader armies gather outside the golden walls of Constantinople, and Emperor Alexios Komnenos stares down at them from his palace with poorly concealed horror. He had asked for mercenaries, perhaps a few thousand soldiers to help defend Byzantine territory. Instead, 50,000 armed Westerners camp outside his capital, led by men he neither trusts nor controls. Among them, Bohemond of Taranto, the same Norman who invaded Byzantine Greece 15 years earlier and nearly took Thessalonica. The emperor knows he must bind these dangerous men with oaths before they turn on him. One by one, the Crusader leaders are summoned to the throne room. One by one, they kneel before the emperor and swear that any territory conquered from the Turks will be returned to Byzantine control. When Bohemond's turn comes, he kneels on the marble floor, places his hand on a holy relic, and speaks the words. But his eyes burn with resentment. He remembers fighting against Alexios, remembers Byzantine treachery, remembers promises broken and allies abandoned. This oath tastes like poison, but he swallows it because he must, for now. By May, the Crusader army lays siege to Nicaea, the capital of Kilij Arslan's Sultanate. The city's walls are formidable, its garrison determined. The Crusaders batter themselves against the defenses for weeks. Men die in escalade attempts. Siege towers burn. The heat grows oppressive as summer approaches, but slowly, methodically, they tighten the noose. Inside Nicaea, the Turkish garrison sends desperate messages to Kilij Arslan, who is campaigning far to the east against rival Turkish emirates. He rushes back to save his capital, but arrives too late. The Crusaders have already invested the city completely. He attacks their siege lines and is repulsed. His wife and children are trapped inside. For the first time, the young Sultan tastes defeat, and then the Byzantines act. While the Crusaders prepare for a final assault, Byzantine ships arrive on Lake Ascanius under cover of darkness. The Turkish garrison, seeing no hope of relief, negotiates directly with the Greeks. They will surrender to the emperor, not to the Franks. No Crusader blood will buy the city's conquest. No Crusader will claim its wealth. Morning comes on the 21st of May. The Crusaders wake to find Byzantine flags flying over Nicaea's towers. The gates remain closed to them. After weeks of siege, after hundreds dead, the Greeks have stolen their victory. Raymond of Toulouse, the proud count from southern France, throws his helmet to the ground in fury. We bled for that city. Our men died on those walls, and the Greeks take it while we sleep like thieves in the night. Bohemond's face is stone, expressionless, but those who know him recognize the cold rage in his eyes. The Greeks have made their position clear. From now on, we trust no one but ourselves. We march for Jerusalem, but we do so knowing we are alone in hostile territory. The Byzantines will help us only when it serves their interests. We must be ready to stand without them. The other nobles mutter agreement. The fragile alliance between East and West has fractured before the real journey even begins. Trust, once broken, cannot be easily repaired. On the 26th of June, the Crusader army departs Nicaea, marching eastward into the heart of Anatolia. But the problem of supply weighs heavily on every commander's mind. 50,000 people cannot march together across a plateau with limited water and scarce food. The risk of starvation is too great. The leaders gather in council. Godfrey of Bouillon, tall and pious, his face perpetually serious, studies crude maps drawn by Byzantine advisors. We must split the army. There is no other way. My forces will march with Raymond of Toulouse and Hugh of Vermandois. Bohemond leads the vanguard with Robert of Normandy, Robert of Flanders, and the Norman contingent. We follow one day behind, perhaps 8 to 10 miles, depending on conditions. Bohemond traces the route with one scarred finger. The road crosses open plateau, perfect terrain for Turkish cavalry. If we are separated and they attack, then we send riders for help, Raymond interrupts, his voice carrying the impatience of a man who wants to keep moving. It is a calculated risk. We have no choice. The land cannot support the entire army in one column. Bohemond nods slowly, accepting the logic even as he recognizes the danger. Then we march at first light and pray that Kilij Arslan is still licking his wounds in the east. Every man must understand the stakes. If the Turks attack in force, the vanguard must hold until reinforcements arrive. There can be no panic, no breaking of formation. Discipline is survival. The meeting dissolves. That night, around hundreds of campfires, veterans explain to younger soldiers what they know of Turkish tactics. The enemy never stands still, they say. They shoot from horseback and retreat before you can close with them. Their bows are powerful, their aim is deadly, and they will kill your horse before they kill you. Stay in formation, trust your armor, do not chase them into the open where they can surround you. These lessons, learned by Normans who fought in Byzantine service, will prove essential in the days ahead. On the morning of the 26th, Bohemond's column begins the march. 10,000 soldiers plus thousands of non-combatants, priests, merchants, families who refuse to stay behind. The heat is immediate and merciless. By midday, men are drinking their water rations too quickly. Horses stumble on rocky ground. The dust, raised by so many feet and hooves, hangs in the air like a choking fog. On the second day, a knight named Waleran rides hard to find Bohemond. My lord, our scouts report Turkish riders shadowing us from the hills. They will not engage, just watching, counting us. Bohemond scans the horizon. Heat shimmer makes everything waver and dance. He knows what this means. The Turks are measuring their strength, determining if they are vulnerable. Send word to the rear column. Tell Godfrey to double march if his men can manage it. We may need them sooner than expected. That night, veterans gather around fires and share stories meant to prepare the younger soldiers. A grizzled Norman sergeant tells a wide-eyed squire named Gilhem about fighting Turks in the emperor's service. They will seem like demons at first, the noise they make, the speed they move. But remember your training. Remember your armor. He taps the boy's chainmail with a knuckle. This is what keeps you alive. Chainmail will stop most arrows if they hit straight on, but the joints, the armpits, the backs of the knees, anywhere two pieces meet, those are vulnerable. And your face. Always keep your helmet on in battle. Always. Gilhem looks down at his borrowed hauberk, inherited from his father who died in debt. What if the arrows pierce the mail? What if it is not enough? An older knight sitting nearby, a man named Everard, whose face is a map of scars, speaks quietly. Then you die, but probably not quickly. Most wounds are not immediately fatal. You will have time to pray, time to make peace. The key is not to die in the first volley. Survive the initial attack, hold your ground, wait for help. Do that, and you have a chance. The words offer little comfort, but Gilhem nods. He understands that comfort is not the point. Preparation is. He sleeps poorly that night, checking his equipment by firelight, praying to saints he barely knows the names of, trying to convince himself he is ready for what comes next. By the 30th of June, after 4 days of brutal marching, Bohemond's exhausted army reaches the grassy meadows along the Timbres River. The sight of fresh water brings relief bordering on joy. Men collapse at the riverbank, plunging their faces into the cool stream. Horses drink deeply. The non-combatants, women and children and priests, huddle together near the center of camp, grateful to stop moving. Tents go up haphazardly, soldiers too tired to maintain proper spacing or defensive positions. Bohemond walks the perimeter with his senior knights. The ruins of ancient Dorylaeum loom in the distance, stone walls crumbled and empty. He does not like this place. The land is too open, too exposed. "Double the sentries tonight," he orders. "I do not trust this silence." Tancred, his nephew, gestures toward the ruins. "Dorylaeum has been abandoned for decades, uncle. If the Turks were going to attack, they would have done it on the march when we were strung out and vulnerable. We are too strong in camp. They would be fools to try." Bohemond says nothing, but he does not sleep. He sits outside his tent in full armor, sword across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the firelight. Once, he thinks he hears horses in the distance. Another time, the faint sound of metal against metal carries on the wind. His instincts, honed by decades of warfare, scream danger, but nothing appears. The night remains quiet except for the normal sounds of a large camp settling to rest. 2 hours before dawn, he finally allows himself to close his eyes. Perhaps his worries are unfounded. Perhaps Tancred is right and they are safe here by the river. He is wrong. The sentry dies with an arrow through his eye before he can shout a warning. Then the war cries begin, rolling across the plain like thunder. Allah Akbar. Allahu Akbar. The words mean nothing to the Christian soldiers scrambling from their tents, but the sound freezes blood. Turkish cavalry explodes from the surrounding hills in all directions, thousands of mounted archers on swift horses, their composite bows singing as they fire. The sky darkens with arrows. The camp erupts into chaos. Unarmored foot soldiers trying to pull on clothes are cut down in seconds. A merchant's wagon catches fire, the flames spreading quickly in the dry morning air. Pilgrims scream and run, only to be trampled or shot. A priest clutches his wooden cross and dies praying, an arrow through his throat. Women grab children and flee toward the center of camp, where there is no safety, only the illusion of distance from the killing. The knights scramble to mount their war horses, massive destriers bred for battle, but the Turkish arrows are already finding the horses, piercing flanks and throats. The animals scream, a sound more terrible than human cries, and collapse, pinning riders beneath half a ton of dying flesh. Young Gilem sees his horse take 3 arrows in rapid succession and go down thrashing. He rolls clear, his borrowed chainmail clanking, his heart hammering so hard he can taste it. Bohemond's voice cuts through the chaos like a blade. Knights, dismount, form a line between the camp and the enemy. Foot soldiers, get the non-combatants to the center. Move, damn you, move! His authority breaks through the panic. Knights who were trying to mount dead or dying horses instead plant their feet and raise their shields. The Turkish arrows hammer into the forming Crusader line like hail against a roof. Gilem stands beside Everard, the veteran knight who had warned him about vulnerable joints. An arrow strikes Everard's chest with tremendous force, driving the wind from his lungs. He staggers backward. Gilem reaches to catch him, certain he is dying. But Everard remains standing. He looks down at the bent arrow lying at his feet. The chainmail held. The iron rings caught the arrowhead and spread the force across multiple links. A few rings broke, but most held. The arrow lost its energy and stopped. Another arrow hits Everard's shoulder pauldron and skitters off with a metallic ring. A third strikes his helmet and ricochets into the sky. He looks at Gilem, and despite the terror, despite the chaos, he grins. The bastards cannot kill us. Hold your ground, boy. Just hold your ground. All along the forming line, the same scene repeats. Arrows that should be lethal strike chainmail and fail to penetrate. Knights take impacts that leave massive bruises but do not pierce flesh. The armor, so heavy and uncomfortable, so expensive that many men mortgage their family lands to afford it, proves its worth in seconds. The Crusaders discover they can survive things that should kill them, but not everything. The arrows find the horses with horrible efficiency. The unarmored foot soldiers die in droves. A pilgrim woman takes an arrow through the chest and falls clutching her infant. Non-combatants huddle in the center of camp, surrounded by a thin line of armored knights, and wait to die. Bohemond walks the line, his presence steadying the men. To the river. Fall back to the marshy ground. The horses cannot charge through soft earth. The knights retreat in formation, maintaining discipline even as arrows continue to fall. They reach the marshy riverbank where the ground is too soft for cavalry charges. Here, they form a tight defensive circle, shields raised, chainmail covering them from neck to knee. The non-combatants crowd inside this circle, thousands of terrified people protected by perhaps 2,000 armored men. The Turkish cavalry wheels around them in great sweeping arcs, firing continuously. The sound is like nothing the Crusaders have experienced. Not just the whistle of arrows and the screams of the dying, but the thunder of hooves, the war cries in a language they do not understand, the whistle and chatter that some believe is demonic speech. The noise alone is a weapon designed to break will and cohesion. From the Turkish lines, Hassan of Cappadocia watches in growing disbelief. He sits on his horse beside a younger commander, both of them protected by a knot of veteran warriors. They have been firing for over an hour. Thousands of arrows have struck the Crusader position. And yet, the Iron Men still stand. "How are they not dead?" the younger commander asks. "We have put 500 arrows into that position alone." He points to a section of the Crusader line where a particularly large knight stands like a boulder in a stream, arrows bouncing off him with each volley. Hassan shakes his head slowly. It is the mail. The iron rings catch the arrowheads. Even when the arrow penetrates, it hits bone or muscle, not vital organs. They are built like fortresses. He pauses, watching another volley slam into the Crusader line with minimal effect. Aim for the gaps, the face, the armpits, the groin, the backs of the knees. No armor can protect everywhere. The order spreads among the Turkish archers. They begin targeting the vulnerable points, aiming with the precision that comes from a lifetime of mounted archery. And now, the Crusaders begin to die. Not quickly, not in the devastating numbers the Turks expected, but slowly, methodically, as arrows find the gaps in their protection. A knight collapses after taking an arrow through the eye slit of his helmet. Another takes a shaft through the armpit joint, where two pieces of mail meet and bleeds out over 10 agonizing minutes, his hands trying uselessly to stop the flow. The horses lie dead in heaps, their bodies providing some cover, but also filling the air with the stench of blood and waste. Inside the defensive circle, the women of the camp refuse to hide. They move through the ranks carrying water skins, exposing themselves to enemy fire to bring water to the knights. One woman, a Norman named Matilda, takes an arrow through the shoulder but continues her work until blood loss makes her stagger. Another woman catches her before she falls. "You must rest," the other woman says. Matilda shakes her head, her face pale. "If I rest, I will not rise again. While I can walk, I will serve." She continues until she finally collapses, and two priests carry her to the center where the wounded are laid in rows. The priests move among the dying, giving last rites, praying over men who will not see the sunset. "Deus vult," they whisper. "Deus vult," God wills it. But what God wills in this moment is unclear to everyone. The sun climbs higher. The temperature inside chainmail becomes its own form of torture. The metal heats until it burns to touch. Men's faces pour with sweat, lips crack and bleed. Some knights remove their helmets to breathe, only to be targeted immediately by Turkish archers who recognize the vulnerability. Gilem watches a knight 3 men down the line take his helmet off to drink, and an arrow punches through his skull before the water touches his lips. "Keep your helmet on," Everard says quietly. "No matter how hot, no matter how much you want to breathe, the helmet stays on." "How long can we do this?" Gilem gasps, his throat dry as sand. Everard's voice is hoarse but steady. "As long as we must. 3 hours pass, then 4. The battle has become an endurance contest, and the Crusaders are losing. Not because their armor has failed, but because human bodies have limits. Men collapse from heat exhaustion inside their protection. Some vomit from thirst. Others hallucinate, seeing angels or demons in the Turkish cavalry. Knights lean against each other just to stay upright, shields held by muscle memory alone. Bohemond has been wounded. An arrow through the muscle of his left arm, another lodged in his side where the mail rings were forced apart by the impact. He pulled the one from his arm himself, snapping the shaft and tossing it aside like refuse. The one in his side he leaves because removing it might cause more bleeding. He walks the line despite the wounds, his presence the only thing holding some men together. A young priest approaches him, tears streaming down his face. My lord, the people are asking if we are being punished. Have we sinned so greatly that God abandons us? Bohemond grips the priest's shoulder, his hand leaving a bloody print on the man's robe. God does not abandon the faithful, Father. He tests them, and we will pass this test. Tell the people to pray and to keep moving water to the fighting men. Faith and water. That is how we survive the next hour. The priest nods and returns to his flock, though privately he wonders if Bohemond believes his own words. 5 hours. 6. The Crusaders are at their absolute lowest point. Some men openly weep from exhaustion and pain. Others stare at nothing, their minds retreating from a reality too terrible to process. The defensive line begins to waver as individual knights collapse, and those beside them must cover the gaps. And then, a cheer rises from the western edge of the line. Through the dust and heat shimmer, riders appear. 50 knights in pristine armor, riding fresh horses, moving in perfect formation. At their head are 2 figures whose armor seems to shine with its own light, so brightly polished it catches the sun like mirrors. Reinforcements, someone shouts. God has sent reinforcements. The 50 knights smash into the Turkish cavalry from an unexpected angle. Godfrey of Bouillon leads them, tall and terrible in his wrath, his sword rising and falling with methodical fury. His knights carve a corridor through the Turkish lines, fighting their way toward Bohemond's battered position. The Turks, surprised by this new force arriving from a direction they had not watched, wheel away to regroup and reassess. Godfrey's knights reach the defensive perimeter and join the line. Godfrey himself dismounts and embraces Bohemond. Both men are covered in blood and dust, their faces lined with exhaustion. How long have you been standing? Godfrey asks. 7 hours, Bohemond replies hoarsely. Give or take an eternity. Godfrey looks at the exhausted, wounded men still holding the line, at the heaps of dead horses, at the arrows carpeting the ground like strange grass. Then you have already won a kind of victory. Now let us finish it. The 2 mysterious figures who led the charge have vanished into the chaos. Later, survivors will swear they were saints sent by God. St. George and St. Demetrius come to deliver the faithful. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they were simply knights whose armor caught the sun at the perfect angle. Both explanations will be recorded by chroniclers, and history will preserve the ambiguity. But the arrival of 50 fresh knights, while heartening, is not enough to break the stalemate. The Turkish forces are vast. Kilij Arslan rallies his commanders for one final coordinated assault. If they can break the Christian line before more reinforcements arrive, the day can still be salvaged. The Turkish cavalry charges from all sides simultaneously, accepting casualties to deliver maximum pressure. The battle becomes hand-to-hand, swords against scimitars, maces against spears, desperate men trying to kill each other in the failing light. The Crusader line bends under the assault. Knights fight back to back, protecting each other's vulnerable points. The armor that saved them from arrows now saves them in close combat. Turkish blades skittering off chainmail, Turkish spears failing to penetrate, but the Turks are warriors too, skilled and fierce. They have learned where the gaps are. They target eye slits, throat guards, armpit joints. Men die screaming as blades find flesh through the joints in their protection. Everard takes a Turkish scimitar through the stomach, the blade sliding between mail links at his waist. He kills his attacker before the strength leaves his arms, driving his sword through the man's throat. Then he falls. Guillem catches him, lowers him gently to the blood-soaked ground. Did we hold? Everard gasps, blood bubbling at his lips. We held, Guillem tells him, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. We held the line. Everard smiles, his eyes focusing on something beyond the visible world. Good. That is good. His hand grips Guillem's arm with surprising strength. Take my armor when this is done. It saved me 100 times today. May it serve you as well. Then he dies. And Guillem has no time to grieve because the Turks are still coming, still pressing, still trying to break through. He stands over Everard's body and raises his shield and becomes one more link in the chain of iron that refuses to break. The Turkish assault continues. The Crusaders are running on pure will now, their bodies long past exhaustion. Some knights are literally holding each other upright. The line contracts, Titans, each man covering less ground as their numbers dwindle. It seems impossible that they can hold much longer, and then a new sound cuts through the din of battle. War horns, distant at first, then unmistakable, thousands of them. Raymond of Toulouse has arrived with the main column. The sound of Raymond's war horns transforms the battlefield. The Turkish cavalry, which moments ago pressed their advantage with growing confidence, suddenly wheels to face this new threat. Kilij Arslan sits on his horse atop a nearby hill, watching the situation unravel. Fresh Crusader forces pour onto the field from the west, thousands of knights and infantry who have double marched to reach the battle. His own warriors, who have been fighting for 7 hours, are exhausted. Their horses are spent, their quivers run low. But the true disaster comes from another direction entirely. Bishop Adhemar of Lipui, the papal legate who fights as readily as he prays, has led a smaller force on a wide loop through the concealing hills. They have been riding hard for hours, navigating by the smoke and dust of battle, circling behind the Turkish position. Now they crest the final ridge and see the Turkish camp spread below. Thousands of tents, supply wagons, horse herds, all defended by skeleton crews who never expected an attack from the rear. For God and Jerusalem, Adhemar roars, and his knights charge downhill like an avalanche. They crash into the camp with devastating effect. Tents are set ablaze, horses scatter in every direction. The few defenders are overwhelmed in minutes. Within a quarter hour, the Turkish camp is an inferno, black smoke rising into the afternoon sky like a signal of doom. Kilij Arslan sees the smoke and understands immediately. His supplies, his treasury, everything he needs to sustain this battle burns. Christian forces have somehow flanked him. His youthful confidence, already shaken by the resilience of the armored knights, collapses entirely. This is not the easy victory he expected. These Franks are not the rabble he crushed at Civito. Hassan rides up beside his sultan, his face grim. "My lord, we must withdraw. Our camp is lost, our warriors are exhausted. If we stay, we risk losing everything." Kilij Arslan's jaw tightens. The admission of defeat tastes like ash. "Fall back," he finally orders. "Save what you can, retreat to the east and regroup." But his voice carries the weight of humiliation. This was supposed to be another demonstration of Turkish superiority. Instead, it has become a lesson in underestimating enemies. The order spreads through the Turkish ranks. The disciplined fighting force that surrounded the Crusaders all day begins to fragment. Warriors see their camp burning and hear conflicting orders. Some attempt to rescue supplies, others simply flee. The cohesion that made them so dangerous dissolves into confusion and panic. The Crusaders, sensing the shift, push forward. Raymond's fresh knights charge into the wavering Turkish flank. Bohemond's exhausted warriors find new strength and press from the center. Godfrey's force hammers from another angle. The Turks, caught between multiple enemies with their base destroyed, do the only sensible thing. They run. The mounted archers, whose mobility has been their greatest strength all day, use that same speed to escape. They stream away to the east in great flowing masses, their horses still swift enough to outpace any pursuit. Some Crusader knights attempt to chase, driven by rage and the desire for revenge, but most simply collapse where they stand. They are too exhausted to even celebrate. 7 hours of standing under fire has drained every reserve of strength. Guillaume leans against his shield, gasping for breath. Around him, knights sink to their knees or sit heavily on the blood-soaked ground. Some remove their helmets for the first time in hours, their faces red and swollen from heat, their lips cracked and bleeding. Others keep their armor on, too tired to remove it, content simply to be still and alive. Bohemond remains standing, surveying the field. His strategic mind is already calculating. They have won, but the cost is staggering. 2,000 dead, perhaps 3,000 wounded. Nearly all their horses killed. The army is crippled, but it still exists. Against impossible odds, they held. He allows himself a moment to feel the weight of that accomplishment before turning to the practical matters of survival. Water for the wounded, scouts to ensure the Turks do not regroup, burial details for the dead. Tancred approaches, his armor dented and scarred, blood on his sword that may or may not be his own. "Uncle, we have captured the Turkish camp. There is gold, silver, precious fabrics, weapons, a fortune. Distribute it to the soldiers, Bohemond orders without hesitation. Every man who stood the line gets a share. God knows they earned it with blood. As evening approaches, the Crusaders begin the grim work of aftermath. The meadow along the Timbres River has become a vast charnel house. Bodies lie everywhere, Christian and Muslim intermingled in death. The wounded cry for water, for mothers, for God. Priests move among them, giving last rites to those who will not see morning. Women search for husbands and sons among the dead, their keening a sound that will haunt survivors' dreams for years. Guillem finds Everard's body where he left it and kneels beside the old knight. Carefully, reverently, he removes the battered chainmail. Each ring is individually riveted, the work of months. The armor is scarred by arrows, dented by impacts, blood-stained but still intact. It saved Everard 100 times before a blade found the gap at his waist. Guillem folds it carefully and sets it aside. He will wear this armor, carry this legacy forward. "Thank you," he whispers, though he's not sure if he thanks Everard, the armor, or God, perhaps all three. That night, around campfires, men who can barely lift their arms strip off their armor for the first time. Bruises cover their bodies, massive black and purple marks where arrows struck but failed to penetrate. Some men have dozens of bruises. They will ache for weeks, but they are alive. And in the morning, they will wake to see the sun. A group of veterans gathers around one fire. A Norman armorer named Thierry spreads out a captured Turkish arrow and a section of damaged chainmail, explaining what happened to younger knights who want to understand how they survived. Look at the arrowhead, designed to pierce leather and light cloth, against bare flesh, lethal at 100 paces, but against mail, the rings catch the point. They spread the force across multiple links. A few break, but most hold. The arrow loses energy and stops. A young knight examines the damaged mail with something like reverence. So the Turks were right to call us men of iron. Bohemond joins the circle, moving stiffly from his wounds, more like men in iron. The metal does not make us brave. It just gives us a chance to be brave without dying in the first 5 minutes. He looks around at the exhausted, battered faces. Tomorrow we march for Antioch. It is a long road. There will be more battles. But today you learned something the Turks learned the hard way. Armor and faith can carry a man through hell itself. Miles to the east, Kilij Arslan sits in a hastily erected command tent, reviewing casualty reports by lamplight. 3,000 Turkish warriors dead, countless wounded, all supplies lost. The disaster is total. Hassan enters with more reports, each one worse than the last. "We had them surrounded," Kilij Arslan says quietly. "We fired 10,000 arrows. We should have slaughtered them like sheep." "They are not sheep, my sultan," Hassan replies carefully. "Their armor is unlike anything we have faced. And their discipline. They stood for 7 hours under fire and never wavered." He pauses, choosing his next words with care. "They are formidable enemies. We must respect that." The young sultan nods slowly, and in this moment, he seems older than his 18 years. Then we learn. We adapt. Next time we do not attack their strength. We attack their weakness. We destroy the roads ahead of them, poison the wells, burn the crops, make Anatolia itself their enemy. Let thirst and heat do what arrows could not. It is the decision of a wise commander, one who has learned from defeat rather than being broken by it. And it is why Kilij Arslan will survive and eventually thrive, while other rulers who refuse to adapt will fall. He looks at Hassan with new understanding. "You were right to counsel caution. I should have listened. Next time I will." The following morning, the Crusader army limps away from Dorylaeum. They move slowly to accommodate thousands of wounded. The dead are buried in mass graves, too many for individual services, too many names to remember. But they are given what dignity the army can provide, priests praying over the mounds of earth that mark where warriors lie far from home. As they march, scouts report that Turkish riders still shadow them from the hills, but there are no more attacks. Kilij Arslan has pulled back his forces, leaving the road open. This puzzles some of the younger soldiers. "Why do they not attack again?" the knight asks Bohemond. "They could hit us while we are weak." Bohemond gestures to the column of limping, wounded, but still armored men. Because we taught them something at Dorylaeum. We taught them that killing us is not easy, that we do not break, that every victory against us will cost more than they can afford to pay. He pauses, watching the grim determination on every face. We are not invincible, but we are too expensive to kill, and sometimes that is enough. The army continues eastward. It takes nearly 3 months to cross Anatolia in the brutal summer heat. Men die of thirst and exhaustion. The suffering is immense, but there are no more major battles. Kilij Arslan has learned his lesson, and he wages a different kind of war now, one of harassment and denial rather than direct confrontation. By October, the Crusaders reach Antioch. The sight of the city's massive walls stretching for miles, towers rising to impossible heights, is both inspiring and daunting. The siege will last 9 months. Many will die of starvation and disease. The suffering at Dorylaeum will seem minor compared to what comes, but the veterans of that terrible day wear their battered armor with quiet pride. They have already survived the worst the East could throw at them. Guillaume stands beside Bohemond, now wearing Everard's scarred chainmail, and looks up at Antioch's walls. Can we take it? Bohemond does not answer immediately. He thinks of another impossible moment, 7 hours standing under fire, arrows that would not pierce, a line that would not break. Yes, we can take it, because we are men of iron, and iron does not break. It takes 9 brutal months to prove him right, but Antioch falls. And eventually, so does Jerusalem. The First Crusade succeeds where all logic said it should fail, and every success traces back to a single day in July when faith and armor held against impossible odds. In a museum centuries later, under glass and careful lights, sits a piece of medieval chainmail with a bent Turkish arrowhead still lodged in it. Each ring is individually riveted, thousands of hours of labor in this single piece. The metal is dark with age, scarred by impacts that should have killed the man who wore it. A historian examines it carefully, explaining to visitors how this armor worked, why it mattered, what it meant for the men who wore it into battle. When we think of medieval knights, the historian says, we imagine glory and pageantry. But the reality was this: heavy, uncomfortable, brutally hot. Wearing armor was not glamorous, it was survival equipment, and at Dorylaeum it meant the difference between a crusade that continued and one that ended in complete disaster. The bent arrow, the scarred rings, the battered helmet displayed nearby with its dented cheek guard. These are not just museum pieces. They are reminders of human beings who wore this equipment, who stood under fire for 7 hours, who refused to break even when breaking seemed like the only rational choice. They are witnesses to a day when 2 worlds collided, and neither was prepared for what the other brought to the field. On the 1st of July, 1097, in a meadow near Dorylaeum, something fundamental changed. The Turks learned that the armored Westerners were not the rabble they had faced before. They were disciplined, determined, protected by technology so effective it seemed miraculous. The Crusaders learned that their faith in armor could carry them through situations that should have been certain death. But the most important lesson was simpler. That survival itself can be a form of victory. That holding ground when the world collapses around you is its own kind of heroism. The battle was not the largest of the First Crusade, not the bloodiest, not the most strategically significant, but it was the first time the Crusaders understood what they were capable of enduring. And it was the moment the Muslim world realized these invaders would not be easily swept aside. Men of iron, the Turks called them. And for 7 hours on a summer day in Anatolia, that is exactly what they were. The armor has long since rusted away. The warriors have been dust for 9 centuries. The kingdoms they fought for have risen and fallen and been forgotten. But the story remains, a testament to human endurance, to the things we build to protect ourselves, both the armor we forge and the courage we find within. On that day, being too hard to break proved to be victory enough.